While I was putting back together my lock assembly, I noticed that when I tightened everything down, the arm was stuck. I couldn't get the lock to release. And I noticed that the pin right there was too far back, and it was locking up against this arm that deals with the lock mechanism. So as I noticed that it was going back too far, and on the Zeiss they've got a little piece of rubber and it's glued on this post or the frame. Whatever is coming back and hitting, that needs a little bit of spacer. It not only makes it quieter, but it also provides a little bit of space to get over this front edge of this lock. So I found it on the bottom, and you'll notice oftentimes that because your lock is engaged many times, that little piece of rubber will come off, and then you'll notice when you put your lock on, you'll hear it click more because that little damper spacer rubber is missing. So I'm going to glue that back on using this product, but you have to use what you have. But there should be some kind of spacer wherever this locking mechanism is going back. Now I could adjust it by adjusting this pin, but it was working before I took it apart. So I think the depth of that pin is correct. It's just going back too far. So I'm going to glue that back on and see if that resolves our issue. Now before you glue your piece of rubber on, you want to try to make sure that you're gluing it at the right spot. So with all your screws in, look and see where it's actually touching, and that's where you're going to want to glue your rubber bumper on, your damper, right, and it looks like it's hitting the frame before it's hitting the stud behind it. But you'll just have to see where it's actually hitting on yours, where the closest point is. And I'm going to take this off and look and see if there's a worn spot on this where it's actually hitting, and then I'll know that's exactly where it's hitting, and I'll glue the piece of rubber right where it's hitting to get the best effect. It might even be between the frame and the stopper in the back, but we'll just see. Okay, I've taken the lock off, and looking at the arm, I can see where there's a worn spot where metal was hitting metal. So I know that's the spot that it's hitting. But I also noticed while I was here that the pin was loose. So I'm going to tighten that. That may need to be adjusted, but I'm going to go ahead and tighten it with a wrench. And I'm going to glue my rubber piece right where that is striking either the stud or the frame. So you have to determine that. Okay, I've glued the rubber bumper back on, I kind of glued it in between the frame and that stud coming up because that's where it was hitting, and it stayed in place with some strong glue, and put it back together, and now it's not coming back too far and the lock is engaging. If I didn't have that piece, I would have tried to get some Velcro, something that's really strong, that's about the same thickness as the piece of the little rubber bumper, and I would have stuck it in there as something. You may have to find something that'll work for you. I also made sure that my screw was tight in there. The nut was loose, so I tightened that. That could have made a difference also. But that's the lock, and I hope if it still wouldn't have worked, I might have attempted adjusting the set screw in there. There's an Allen that you can adjust the depth of the little, whatever that piece is called, on your arm. If your lock is not engaging when you push the handle forward, then it's possible that you need some adjustment on the adjustment screw that's at the bottom of this handle. It needs to be shortened so that this locking handle, when it's pushed towards the inside, is what locks it. If I push it with my finger hard, it won't turn, but if I release, the axle turns. So that just means that this adjustment screw is out of adjustment, and we need to correct that. You would have to take the 4 screws out of your block assembly and get to that. When I take off the lock assembly, the 4 screws, I can get to the adjustment, lock adjustment, and it's a screw with a nut around it to tighten it, and it looks like a 2mm Allen wrench goes in there. So I would have to back off on the Allen a few threads and then hold it while I tighten the nut. Okay, I've adjusted it where it's just barely sticking out. There's still a little bit of room, but it's sticking out, and I'm going to hook it back up and see if that will solve the lock issue. Okay, I had to do it a little bit more. I had to unscrew it a little bit more to make the lock stop strong. So that little pin, that adjustment, you may have to keep screwing it, unscrewing it till there's just a little bit sticking out, so that it will allow the bar, the locking bar, to go towards the inside of the slit lamp, and that locks it. So you may have to, if you don't have the pin, you may not need it. I'm not sure, but and sometimes, and I have to admit that I've done it before too, even when the pin was all the way in, it was still not enough, so I gently bent the bar in a little bit, this bar, to get the space I needed. So you take a risk by doing that, but I've done it before on an occasion, and it worked. So just be careful, because that's very thin metal. You don't want to bend it because it could crack easily. You have to be very gentle. But hope that works for you. Once you have your screw adjusted correctly, you might want to put something on it to keep it from unscrewing again, maybe some Loctite or some fingernail polish to keep it from backing out again.